Hi, it's me, Joan, Mainline Sociology, back at you with some current events to highlight the concept that we went over in Marx with under crisis tendencies of capitalism and ways to avoid them. And I didn't go over all of them, but I did mention imperialism, and that's expanding capitalism around the world. Now, we'll come back to this idea of alienation, but I hope you've followed along long enough to understand that when Marx hit the scene in 1867, we know that they already had neurobiology down literally to a science because of all the work in asylums and neurobiology. So basically, they already had a way to hack into your brain to get you divided inside yourself, right? Remember, whatever divides the people strengthens the overall system. And by this time, they had every single institution created. Now, how can we bring this into current events? Well, I received an email that explains everything, and I'll read it to you. Now, this was written by John Forrest Little. And what we're going to have is an overview of what's going on right now in our world, which is, if I went into a sidetrack of how wonderful things are, I would get too emotional about it because things are going so well. It might not seem that way to you at this time because of the apocalyptic changes that are going on, but stay with me and I will explain it to you as we go. So, what does this John Forrest Little say? All right, he's going to explain to you the money system. In the United States had the privilege of dominating the global monetary system since 1944, this Bretton Woods Agreement. It's often presented to the public like it's the natural order of things, such as the law of gravity, or that it's a given, like oxygen will always be there to breathe. This assumption-based narrative leads people to think that the rest of the world is happy with the US being the global reserve currency. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now let's back up a little bit, back way up. We're going to back way up to this notion of this 13th Amendment and the hijacking of our Constitution and turning it into a corporation in 1871. Well, this is information that we didn't learn in school, and it was a big surprise to me. It explained everything, and I will explain it to you the best I can. Now, let's flash back to settlers in 1840 coming over here, believing they had escaped the domination of the Vatican and the Crown. and having this new contract with the government. The government's not going to kill me. I have the right to life. I have the right to liberty. I can self-govern, and I have the right to pursue my happiness, which means whatever makes me tick, whatever I like to do, that's going to end up being a big contribution to society, and the government's not going to come in and tax my gig, right? Well, that is the law. The Constitution before 1871 was the law of the land, and people participated in governments. Well, as they say, meanwhile, back at the ranch, let's go back to 1810. Congress proposed a thing called the Title of Nobility Act to amend the Constitution. Remember, we got to be careful with these amendments. We already knew that, but they wanted to amend the Constitution, and to amend the Constitution, you need 3/4 of the states to agree before an amendment can be ratified or turned into law. At that time, there were 17 states. 13 needed to ratify, right? Because 3/4. But only 12 states would. Enter the War of 1812, which made Virginia a state. That one more vote would lead to the 13th Amendment. That's when the door was opened for this old empire. Remember, Marx said, oh, one mode of production is tossed out for a new one. Well, this is when they captured the United States and created this global empire of tyranny, aka imperialism. So what is this 13th Amendment? The 13th Amendment basically turned the Constitution into a corporation. That means every man, woman, child would be captured or defined by the idea of the birth certificate, which gave you a number and made you an asset of the corporation. Well, this was only an extension of this Pope Boniface in 1302. Here's a picture of this declaration where he said, all souls belong to the Vatican. So this 1302 declaration from Pope Boniface is basically the same kind of idea of what happened with the 13th Amendment. All right, and that's where it started to create this notion of fiat currency, or a currency and a means of exchange that had no value. It was not backed by gold or silver or anything like that. Now, it took all the way until 1971 for this to be clear to everybody in the United States. We're off the gold standard. This is just paper money, and I'll explain to you how that works after we go through the article. That gives you, but it gives you a little bit of background to understand how this could happen. So this is the playbook straight up. The U.S. can devalue the Federal Reserve note, which is a private corporation, right? Doesn't have anything to do with federal or anything like that. It's just a business. So the U.S. can devalue the Federal Reserve note dollar to oblivion while other countries receive it in exchange for their tangible goods and hold it in reserve. The U.S. can confiscate other countries' assets, currency reserves, because of our military advantage. That's exactly what happened in Russia. Now, if you don't remember, tear down that wall. That was with President Reagan said that. And what that did was broke up Russia into all these little states. And what do we know as an operating principle? Whatever divides strengthens the system. Remember, the superstars, they create everything, right? So making smaller nation states is the same thing. Whatever divides the people strengthens the overall system, right? So you think, oh, that's such a great thing that they did that. Well, there's more to it, but it was a show of dominance. You want to nuke the whole world, or else you can break yourself up into little pieces. We'll put it that way. So the U.S. can also block other countries from using the global financial system, SWIFT. It sets up and controls. SWIFT is a whole other ball of wax, but basically for a long time, if you wanted to exchange anything, you're using this fiat currency or petrodollar, some people call it, and they got a big percentage of every single transaction. So they're taking. Remember, I'm supposed to be able to, if I produce something, I'm supposed to keep, myself going day by day. But the capitalists set it up with the labor theory of value, where if it's 4 hours you're working to maintain, then you got to work 8 hours. Just to go back to your principles that you already know. Well, naturally, many countries are looking for ways to exit this type of system. The de-dollarization process is well underway and now involves far more countries than the U.S. expected. Even Saudi Arabia, the key country in the petrodollar, is beginning to trade outside the dollar, okay, and accept these gold-backed currencies that you're going to learn about here. So Russia believes the gold-pegged ruble is part of the strategy to topple the US dollar on the world stage. And here's how it came into existence. Russian economic advisor to Putin, we're going to call him Serge. Serge was one of the first people the US sanctioned during its prior round of sanctions in 2014. Basically, all that means is, hey, I'm the United States of America now. Hey, if you're not going to play my game and use my money that's worth nothing, then I'm not going to trade with you. I'm not going to buy anything from you. Okay? Big problem because we're in a world system. The more aggressive the Americans are, the sooner they will see the final collapse of the dollar as the only way for the victims of American aggression to stop this aggression and get rid of the dollar. As soon as we in China are through with the dollar, it would be the end of the United States military might. 2017, Serge said that. So Serge also stated, in the face of recent sanctions, Russia's task is not to learn to play by the crooked rules of the West, but to build transparent and mutually beneficial rules of trade with friendly countries, to create their own pricing systems, exchange, trading, and investment. Serge also said gold will be a unique tool to fight against Western sanctions, inclusive of all major international commodities: oil, gas, food, fertilizer, metals, and solid minerals. After new sanctions in 2022, including kicking Russia out of the London bullion market exchange, Moscow began launching its own bullion exchange to trade in physical gold with its allies. So what they're saying here is, we're done with this fiat currency, and I'll show you exactly why that's a smart move. Depending on who you are and how much you're keeping up with things, this group of nations are now known as the BRICS countries. Okay, so together they're making new trade agreements with one another outside the US system. And they call them soft currencies, but they're really not. They're backed by gold. Okay? But the use of soft currencies can be tenuous. For example, Russia may tell India, you can buy our oil and we will accept your rubies. India may agree to accept Russian rubles. This system is flimsy because countries participate, nations begin collecting a lot of currencies they don't need and have to unload them on markets. Maybe this is a little bit too much information. I want to make this simple because it gets really simple. It's super simple. The sanctions imposed on Russia have boomeranged the Western economy. In 2023, all these circumstances will objectively affect the change in the stereotypes of investment policies in the world, from risky investments to complex financial instruments to invest in trading traditional assets, primarily gold. All right. Well, we're not going to go into the risk. This is the really interesting part. Gold estimated market cap is 12.1 trillion. By multiplying the current gold price by the world's above ground gold reserves. That whole other issue, but let's just say that there has been the discovery of so much gold underneath the ground. You can't even say the numbers because it's so big. But this is part of an operation that has been going on to reclaim this world for people, which is the bigger issue here. Okay, so these BRICS nations, okay, which last count, India, China, Russia, and I'm I'm pretty sure that it's also Brazil and a number of other countries around the world, a lot of countries around the world, nations that are starting to back their currencies with gold. And this is a very long story, but let's look at this. BRICS nations or people who are forming this new system of metal-backed currencies are estimated to hold over 80% of this 12.1 trillion in gold. India, the citizens, not the government, are the largest collective owners of gold with more than 500,000 tons. China's government is likely to have 20,000 tons. Now, if these nations that are in the BRICS system have 80% of the gold, this is what they're saying, that puts the United States of America fiat system in grave danger. Now you're wondering, what do you mean fiat currency system? This has to do with the real 13th Amendment and the fact that our Constitution was hijacked into a corporation. Well, what are the assets of this corporation? That would be you. You are the asset of the corporation. It's no longer the labor theory of value that Marx gives us. In 1871, they said, no, we own all of it. We can let them think that they're going to work and they're going to get something out of it, but in reality, they're trading us on the stock market, which is an extension of this idea of the Vatican saying all souls belong to the Vatican, every piece of dirt and everything that's on this planet, we own it. And they're very meticulous in the way they go about claiming that. For the first few systems that they had, slavery, you knew you were a slave. Second, oh, you can farm, you can live in your little clans and your villages, but when we come in there, you're gonna buck up and give us some. And it was violent. Well, it hasn't been violent. Well, it's been violent in the world with our 3 world wars that we talked about already. But in reality, a lot of people, the trick to Marx was to get the people to not even know they were a slave. Okay, so let's look at how this fiat currency works. And I love this, 7thgenerationdesign.com. If you want to read about so many things I think that are really presented in a straightforward way, this is the place to go. Okay, so the monetary system we're subject to this day and age is diametrically opposed to having a regenerative economy. Simply put, a regenerative economy cannot exist or will fail if the money used to transact within it violates the ethics of care for the earth, care for the people, reinvest the surplus toward earth care and people care. Our monetary system does none of these things. In fact, the system is structured to actively work against them by design. Go listen to the lecture on Marx again, and he lays out the design for us. This is a step-by-step visual guide that walks us through how currency, maritime law, not law of the land anymore, and by its end, I hope you'll agree that we better change this. And yes, for the last 6 years, this mob has been given every opportunity to change it, but they haven't. So it's going to change for them by virtue of the article that I just read to you. Most people have heard that our currency is printed out of thin air and are vaguely aware of inflation as a threat to their savings. In this post, we aim to illustrate exactly how this fraud works. We believe once an individual truly understands the fraud being perpetuated against them, they can begin to take concrete actions to spread awareness, protect themselves and their family, and redirect their own life energy away from those institutions that are a one-way drain on society and into a closed-loop regenerative system that create true wealth and opportunity for themselves and surrounding community and global humanity at large, which is it's happening, people. It's just so fantastic what's going on. And just last night, I could tell our internet is just the World Wide Web has been reclaimed, and I have indicators for these things, and we'll get to that, how I've followed the new system creation. So the reason I'm saying that is I want you to know you are safe. You are entering a world in which your unique talent and your ability to self-govern and your human kindness toward fellow man, fellow animals, and this earth will be able to happen. I mean, it's so wonderful. So anyway, a currency is a medium of exchange. Many people have access to it in order to change it. I mean, trade it. So that's the money that you have in your pocket. Okay, so I got $2,000 this month and I have it right here in my hand, and oops, there goes 1,500 for my rent. I have $500 left. I have bills. I need to buy food, right? We're using that middleman. And we're always coming up short. I mean, not everyone, but if you're any kind of normal, you've had a hard time. You're coming up short sometimes. Everything's so expensive, and that is all artificial. And the means of exchange is artificial too, because it's not backed by gold. So it's a unit, right? $1. It's portable and easy to use. Got $1 in my pocket, and now it's a piece of plastic, right? It's divisible. Here's $1. That costs a nickel. You get 95 cents back. And it's fungible. That's a cool word. Interchangeable. $1 in my pocket buys the same as $1 in your pocket. All right. So here's how it works. Wait. Here we go. So politicians like to spend more than their income. And you've noticed that because when we get right, these people are, when we were under the corporation, these people were just CEOs of the corporation. And we know exactly how that works, right? It's like, oh, I got to get a raise. I need $500,000 a year, so I'll take that. It's much worse than this. But I'll just keep printing money because it's not worth anything anyway, right? It's printed out of thin air, this fiat currency. And because the real asset, remember, labor, human input is the only thing of real value. And then, of course, our beautiful Mother Earth. And because everything is extracted from there. All right. So, called deficit spending. That's not going to be news to anybody. We've lived under this deficit forever, or for our lifetimes anyway. So, in order to fund this deficit, the Treasury issues a bond, essentially a promise, a glorified IOU. I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Well, if you give us $100 today, we'll repay you that $100 plus interest at some time in the future. This is what they're saying. Have they ever repaid it? Not in my lifetime. These bonds, promises, or glorified IOUs are called treasuries and are paid back via taxation. So they have to keep raising taxes, and they do it in such clever ways that sometimes you don't even know you're paying a tax for something. Or, I need to pay for my driver's license. I need to pay for my car license. I need to get a business license. And if you live in California, your eyes are already rolling back in your head because we can't even keep track of that here. But as I said, it's going to be fine. But let's stick to this. Treasuries are sold at auctions to the big banks or the dealers who either earn interest by holding the bond or more typically resell the bonds to the Federal Reserve. Well, that's a big business and a big Ponzi scheme. Remember, they're just a corporation that just happened to convince us all that they were not a corporation. And so government creates these glorified IOUs, sends it to the Treasury, who give it to the banks with IOUs, with newly minted currency or money out of thin air they received from the Federal Reserve. And then now it's just numbers in a computer, and then gives it back to the Treasury. So it's this endless loop of nothingness. So, of course, they're spending all this money, and I'll show you what they do with it. We'll just hang on to our hat there. The public's on the hook to pay back the interest with future taxation. That means, and I think they go into that down here, but that means when your child is born, you're born into the world, boom, already that child, I think they go into how much each child owes the government when they're born. And that's how they justify claiming that child as an asset of the corporation. Let's see, where did they put that? The long and the short of it is that what happened in 1871 in the United States paved the way for the controllers. Remember, the controllers control the superstructure, which is every single institution, every single belief, every single ideology you have, every single role that you take up, everything. What we didn't know when we were studying Marx 30, 40 years ago is that, wow, they really meant it. They hijacked everything, and we are nothing but an asset to this corporation. Now, it gets a little bit trickier, but not too much trickier. So we already have Mr. Boniface, the Pope, saying in 1302, all souls belong to the Vatican. We own the whole entire earth, and we are God. And the whole thing is to hijack and limit the glorious creation of Creator God, of the real God, right? So they're very good at their laws. So they've created these laws over the hundreds of years. The United States presented a problem. I already covered that. And they came in and they hijacked it through the process that I explained, called the title of Nobility Act, and then the 13th Amendment, which I showed you. So now they're allowed to structure the corporation, which is the whole entire world now, as far as they're concerned, right? With this concept of imperialism expanding capitalism around the world. We still have these three. Well, we have the Vatican. They said, well, they own everything. Then we have the Crown. They control everything. And now we have the United States as a corporation that's sort of encompasses everything, but they use these old laws. And this is a very important one to keep in mind, because right here is where they talk about us being, corporation, corpse. We are already that dead labor force. Now you can look at the dead labor force as turning each human being into a robot, but they're operating on the principle that we're already dead. The only thing we're good for, us beasts without the mind, remember Marx was very specific about, we don't have a mind, we're just some kind of beast. We will never figure this out. In other words, their cover story, because they're so far ahead of us. So they get to make all these laws. So here, right here, we say, if this is part of their charter of a corporation, if such a person or persons for whose lives or lives such estates, we're not people, we're sort of estates, different people rule over us, or shall be granted as foresaid, we shall remain at sea or beyond the seas, absent from themselves in this realm by the space of 7 years together, and no sufficient and evident proof shall be made of the lives of such persons or persons respectively. You get the idea. This is how that they own us. And you say, well, wait a second. I never said that the Crown and the Corporation of the United States and the Vatican could own me. Well, that's where they get you. Devil's in the details. That's where they get you. The birth certificate, birthing. You come through a birth canal. It's all about not law of the land, but law of the sea, out to sea. That's where they took us, okay, out to sea. And then the child is birthed by a doctor. They're docked literally into this world. So they are just an entity. I won't go into the details right now, but if you want to check, if you have a birth certificate, and I did, when I learned this, I dug out my birth certificate and I'm like, whoa, it's true. You will see on there that the person that you came out of, your mother, and your father usually will sign that birth certificate under a square called informant, which means your mother and father, and they didn't know, I mean, or probably, that they were signing away their rights to you as a human. It's shocking, but it's true. And then that really came into, I mean, they take, the enemy keeps meticulous records. That's the good news. But when they gave you that birth certificate number, it becomes even easier for you to track down where you're being traded and so forth on this thing they call the stock exchange. All right, it became easy. Now, when I was born, I could leave the hospital without a social security number, even though there were social security numbers at that time. Enter 20 years later, 20, 30 years later, if you have your child in a hospital, they will say, you can't leave this hospital until we assign your child a birth certificate. And they also keep a record of the blood. And that's where you see the blood on these certificates. When I get into the crown and how that was going, all these documents have blood on them. What I want you to be aware of, and that's a lot to take in, that there are these BRICS nations that are saying we're going to back our currency with a precious metal. But this currency, this idea of corporate domination, is very real. And it's so real, this corporate domination, that it has entered into your mind as if it's the natural order of things, that you are powerlessness. You're powerless over this corporate monstrosity. You're alienated from your own self. Here in the United States, we don't even realize that we're slaves to these corporations, and what a huge difference it will make when 1% of the people on the planet Earth do not control and own anything. Because whatever fragments the working class, the people, makes the overall system stronger. This has so many examples that it's hard to get your head around at first. But remember, we have to see systems inside of ourselves before we can see them outside of ourselves. We've been sold the idea that more division is better every single time. And right now they're talking about this gender idea, like more categories is better. It is not better. It's far worse. Far worse. And a great example is the idea of Martin Luther way back when. Remember, Martin Luther had some problems with the way the Vatican was operating. Serious problems. And it was a very bloody time in the history. But eventually, this whole idea of Lutheran came in. And so you think, oh, that's better because we don't have to be owned by the Vatican. We're talking 1,000 years ago or so. By now, do you realize there are over 10,000 denominations of Christianity alone? And people in the United States will say, oh, that's such a good thing because I can be a Lutheran or I can be an Episcopalian or I can be a Methodist or I can be a Baptist, right? We interpret the Bible differently than the Vatican does. But that's false consciousness. It's just false consciousness because remember, we have a principle. Whatever fragments the working class strengthens the overall systems. We're in a place of division that's so divided, people don't even realize it's divided. And then we talk about this, oh, well, this 1% owns everything. Well, yeah, how often do we have to say it? They put beliefs in your head that you think are yours. That's how they operate. And there's all kinds of really cool ways you can look at these connections in general, but just to keep it real simple, we come back to this. Simple. How the problem, reaction, solution paradigm works. Remember, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the dialectic that moves us toward false consciousness, as we discussed already. But we have these internal divisions inside of ourselves. Okay, right now I'm a mother, but then in 5 minutes I got to go be a banker, and then a couple hours from then I'm going to go be a consumer at the grocery store, and we're fragmented inside of ourselves, and no one has to hammer in to your head now that you're divided in yourself, because people are depressed. You have a small group of narcissists, but the rest of us are just depressed. Oh, another solution they got for that one, right? Take some pills. Everybody's depressed, of course you are. And that's another trap, because every time the government creates or exploits a problem, then attributes it to other people. Well, if it weren't for those girls, then taking up all the jobs, then the boys would have work, or you name it, it's out there. We're blaming them. They put the blame back on us, just like narcissists do. Exactly the same thing. They're telling you who they are. We want division, we want war, we have a fake money system, but do they ever say that outright? No. They say, well, of course we do, because you people are beasts. You can't get along because look at all the division. I mean, just even based on how much melanin in your skin, we can divide you. We've been just talking about lay down and take it. Oy, when you say it out loud, it's so ridiculous. We all know it's ridiculous. That's the thing. So they create this problem. Well, those terrorists bombed our trade centers, so we have to go over there and have a war. When what happened? Well, they bombed the train set. They bombed it and they blamed it on them. Exact same thing. That's what they're doing. So then the populace reacts by asking the government for protection and help to solve the problem. Well, that's your first mistake, but so be it. The government offers a solution that was planned by them long before the crisis occurred. Okay? So way back in 1840, Karl Marx, the personification of we're going to tell you what we're doing. You're just not going to understand it anyway. Which, well, you do now. They have to put their plans out there. This is one of the things that I've learned in the past 6 years or so. We humans, talking to you, human, we have been endowed by our Creator God. This is a free will planet. Our Father in heaven, who created us in His perfect image, gave us free will choice. Well, we can choose. We have to choose not to subordinate ourselves to another person's expectations. But our choices in life have become very limited by this whole bureaucratic system of traps. What divided what seemed to be more classes. Remember, okay, no, it's not just the king and the Pope telling you what to do and, killing you if you didn't do it and torturing. Just look up pictures of the Tower of London and you'll find out what people who were disobedient, what happened to them. So what Marx gives us is a depiction of the fact that, hey, there's more classes, and we've discussed about that. So this will all come back to the struggle that we're in now, or this time loop that we're going back to, because as you saw from Adolf Dane, people were onto this by, by 1930. They knew they were in a trap. The art got dark. And then enter the booze, enter the wars, enter all the things that they've done to us to keep this notion of imperialism going. So most people, I'm a petty bourgeoisie. I chose my profession. I'm a teacher. I'm a banker. I'm an engineer. I'm not a slave. I just buy things from slaves. And we go back to Executive Order 11110. That was from John F. Kennedy, our president, President Kennedy. He wanted to get our money back on a silver standard. If not gold, hey, at least silver, to try to get some real value in our exchange process. And he was killed for that by these people, which brings in other concepts, but for you to remember that there are nations right now who are estimated to have over 80% of the above ground gold, and they're trading it, and they're leaving us here in the United States, or our United States government, in the lurch, exposing the fiat currency for what it really is, made possible by this declaration Thursday evening, July 25th, 1861, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which made our real Constitution null and void, and it was replaced by this corporate entity that goes way back to the Venetians. Okay, so I'll leave you with something fun that I like to do. A game that I like to play is called Hink Pink. And what Hink Pink is you say two words that mean something and they rhyme, and then you give the other person a chance to guess those words using different ones. So it's like say you have something like a Hink Pink would be my dad's store, and you have to guess the Hink Pink for that. Pop shop. See how that rhymes? Well, I'm pretty advanced at this, and it's a really super fun game to play in a circle. But the first principle that I try to get out to people is that we have now and always had one enemy. It's not this guy's against me, that guy's against me, my spouse is against me, my children are against me, the banker's against me, I can't afford the inch. It's not like that at all. We have one enemy creating all of these ideas that are false consciousness. And there's a hinkily pinkily for that. And it is our enemy, and it's a hinkily pinkily, and I'll leave you on that to see if you can guess what that is. And it goes all the way back to the Bible, but it's a real good one. Now, you have a good day. Remember, everything is so fantastic, but in order for us to proceed into the next age, we have to learn who controlled us and how, because if we don't, it's going to happen all over again. And we have this opportunity, and it is happening and it's happening so fast. I want you to understand how important this is and what a great future you have to look forward to. Joan out.